All right, let's get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Sylvia Sadowski, and I'm the Strategic and Business Planning Advisor in PED. And I'd like to welcome everybody to our PED Lunch and Learn. Welcome back to those joining us regularly, and welcome to those who are joining us for their first time. Today, we will learn about the Tourism and Culture Division's collaborative approach to placemaking and animation, and the exciting projects that are in store for this year, as well as those projects that were installed in previous years. These projects are testing new, temporary ways to outdoor public spaces and involve collaboration between residents, artists, community groups, and staff. For today's presenters, we have Sarah Ehmke, Senior Project Manager of Placemaking and Animation, and Peter Fortune, Manager of Placemaking and Public Art and Projects. Sarah and Peter both work in the Tourism and Culture Division within PED. And we also have a special guest speaker from Public Works today, and that's Kara Bunn, Manager of Parks and Cemeteries. So a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Please ensure that your microphones are muted, and this lunch and learn will be recorded. At the end of the session, at about 1:45, there'll be a question and answer session where you can raise your hand and you'll be called upon to unmute yourself and ask a question to any of our speakers. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Sarah to start off our presentation. Go ahead, Sarah.
Great. Thanks so much for having us today to talk about placemaking and animation. We're excited to be here to talk about what we have, like you said, we have what we've been doing the last couple of years, as well as what we have planned for this year. So myself, Peter and Kara, I'll have info to share today about our roles and how we are approaching this work. The first thing we'll cover though today is what is placemaking, because I think it's a term that not everybody is familiar with. We'll be talking about how our section, so Placemaking Public Art Projects, does this work. We'll be also talking about how we work within PED, how we work within across departments. So grateful for Kara to be here because we've been working a lot with parks as we look at the placemaking and animation work that we're doing, because it's still a relatively new term. My position's only been existing for about a year. Placemaking was added to our section title fairly recently, and post-COVID, it's been a whole new way of interacting with public spaces and community interest and corporate interest in activating these spaces in a slightly different way than maybe we did before. So I'm going to change my slide, which of course is now not working. We did practice this before. There we go. Okay, so placemaking. What is placemaking? When we think about placemaking, we can think about it a few different ways. But when I've been describing to a lot of the community members we've been working with it, we talk about placemaking as a way to make meaningful change or impact to a public space. We can use placemaking to reimagine and reinvent public spaces to respond to specific community needs or something that's specifically happening at the moment. Placemaking is specific to the place, as the name indicates. Placemaking projects are really successful when they can do what's demonstrated in this graphic, when placemaking projects are really able to overlap a couple of different elements. So place, the people of that place, and the project details reflect that place as well. So thinking about a place, thinking about the unique geography of that space, the unique people that are using the space now, have used it in the past, could be using it in the future, talking about the heritage, the culture, and thinking about what is the character of that place through placemaking. So when we've been when I've been talking to community members and talking about what placemaking is, one of the examples I like to use is if you think about the way that you use public spaces in your daily life, the places you walk by or walk through, the parks that you are able to use in your recreation time, the maybe city streetgates that you go to when you're going to work, those are the spaces that you're moving through. What we want to do through placemaking is change from a space to a place. A space is a place, a space is an area that you are walking by. that you're walking through. Maybe you're not paying a lot of attention to it, but if we're able to change those to places, those are places that you want to spend time, that you want to take care of, that have a character and element of interest that maybe brings a sense of community pride and a unique story and interaction in that place. If you're not sure if your project is that place-based, if you imagine your project that you're proposing and wondering if it's placemaking, if you were able to pick it up and move it to another part of the city, by making that move, you should be losing some quality. It shouldn't have the same meaning by moving the place. So the project can be similar, but when we're doing placemaking, we're trying to make those details really specific to the area and the people that we're doing those projects. One of the people I talked to before talked about the stickiness. We want people to stick to those areas, spend more time, and care more about it. So that's sort of the way that we've been describing placemaking to the community, but we do have a council approved definition as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Peter to talk a little bit about what we're doing as a section and what we've done the last sort of year or two when it comes to placemaking and animation.
Thanks, Sarah. So on to the next slide. We do have a council-approved definition for what placemaking is, and it's a lot of words. No surprises there, but in a nutshell, as Sarah was saying, it really comes down to being the community establishing the character of a place. We have placemaking as part of our section's name. However, we're doing it in conjunction with a lot of other departments within the city. So for example, parks, landscape architectural services, economic development, recreation, active transportation, heritage. So a lot of what we do is making connections amongst these different stakeholders, pulling us all together, and then also pushing some boundaries and the envelope and getting people out of their comfort zones to try new things. Because a lot of the projects we're initiating, it's the first time we've done it. It's the first time anyone's ever tried it, and we're trying to get out of a conservative approach and to experiment more. So to help define the type of placemaking that our section does, we have permanent public art. So that's where we really began, and that's pieces that are city-owned public pieces. So these usually align with master plans developed for public areas or for new development. And they have larger budgets and they take a long time, up to a year or more even. We have a few that have been going on for quite some time now. And they have a high level of community engagement to determine what that art is that is produced. And right now we're collecting input actually from Engage Hamilton for a permanent art piece that's going on as part of Hamilton's Electric City. It's the Nikola Tesla and the Five Johns competition. Please feel free to have a look at that and weigh in if you see anything you like. So over the last few years, our scope of work has started to expand to also include things like temporary art in public places and animating public space. Sarah will go on to describe later on. So on the next slide about temporary public art. So here are some examples of what we consider temporary public art. The definition of temporary is a bit elastic, but they usually have a smaller project budget and they have a set end date typically for removal or replacement. So these pieces have a lot of, usually a mix of community partners. So you've got artist collectives, you've got nonprofits, you've got BIAs, and then temporary art is usually community initiated and tends to be quicker and more responsive to local conditions. So you can see how we're starting to try to balance out public art with temporary art. And then onto the next slide, you've got animating public spaces. So we're also trying to do this, and animation of public spaces helps bring a space to life with sounds and movement. And also we attempt to hit all the senses, so it can be smell as well. It's what you hear, it's what you feel, it's what you experience. So we're trying to bring out a depth in how people experience the city. And then two of our programs in the last year that helped animate spaces were the summer concert series hosted in 10 BIAs and the pop-up series at Pier 8. So what we're trying to do overall in this program is to try to bring a familiarity to a space and give a sense of ownership and belonging, but also to show the potential of space. So for example, that's what we're trying to do at Pier 8, where it has a history, but also it can be redefined. So thank you very much, and back to Sarah.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, we are really hoping to show the potential of the uses of space so that other people can also consider these. We do work with groups who have received funding. There's been a lot of federal grants post-COVID for using and activating public spaces. So we also work with those community groups and hope, again, because we want shared ownership of these public spaces. When we think about the types of projects that we have done so far, there are some characteristics that are consistent amongst the ones that are sort of placemaking as well as the ones that are animating public spaces. So some characteristics are the use of outdoor public space. Most of the projects we do are on city-owned property, but we do through our Concrete Canvas, through the Concrete Canvas Festival, through the Placemaking Grant Program, which we'll talk about, do allow and have supported projects that happen on outdoor public spaces that are not city-owned as well, so privately owned or by another public entity. These projects are temporary. Peter mentioned there's no set definition of what temporary is. Sometimes it's a few months, a season, a year. Right now, we're sort of looking at 3 to 5 years for some of our projects as well as temporary. But the components that they have is that that everyone involved in the project knows it's not forever, that there is no expectation from ongoing maintenance, that it can be replaced with something else as community needs change, as the city changes their approach, and just to add change and interest to the public spaces as well. We are also testing new ways. So a lot of the projects we've done have been maybe tried in the past, but not to the same degree we are now, or we've just even changed certain elements of it. This is about seeing what we can do in a temporary way. We are working with artists and allowing artwork. So whether it be visual art or performance art. And this is one of the things that separates us from what a lot of the colleagues across the corporation are doing with placemaking. Ours is really based in the arts community. The work we're doing is collaborative and it is place-based. So again, coming back to that definition of placemaking is that there should be a project element that is integral to the place, the stories of that place, the geography of that place, the people of that place. We do, you might be wondering, why placemaking? Why now? And I mean, as I said, part of it that was pushing for this portfolio to be created and to be expanded is post-COVID. Is during COVID, the interest of public spaces and the use of public spaces, and a lot of people just imagining what could be, especially when the use of some spaces was restricted. Thinking of playgrounds at the one time. So what other spaces were available for kids to play? So one of the funding components that drives our projects is the Mayor's Task Force on Economic Recovery, which provided funds for placemaking and animation activities within commercial areas. We are also funded partly through the waterfront development capital projects, specifically for the public spaces along Pier 8, especially now that we have the new park spaces to use and animate the gantry stage. So we'll talk more about how we're using those funds. We also, within Tourism and Culture Division, have a section called the Creative Industries and Cultural Development section. And the creative industries, are the artists that are working and the creative businesses that are working. And so some of our funding comes from those capital and operating accounts to provide paid opportunities for creative workers and artists to be able to do their work, especially again with the restrictions that happened during COVID. And then our last section is just, other project funding. Sometimes we have single projects that have a single source and otherwise projects that are coming through from councillors occasionally or from council, as well as that are from, as I mentioned before, funded by the community, and they're looking for some assistance on how to get approval to have their projects take place in public spaces. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the projects that we have upcoming for 2023 that have been funded from these 4 different areas of funding. Mayor's Task Force on Economic Recovery, as I mentioned, is about animating commercial areas. So these are areas that are both have BIAs, like formalized BIAs, but also that have a pedestrian commercial feel that are commercial and have a pedestrian appeal to them. We are doing mostly projects that are intended for pedestrians because we want people to be spending time in those spaces, going into the shops, doing the shopping, and getting used to that area. And again, building a familiarity and comfort being in those spaces so that they have some ownership and want to spend time. So we're just one element of that. We know that our active colleagues do a lot of that work as well. So some things exciting that we're excited to support coming forward is the Concrete Canvas Festival. This is a community-led festival that is about primarily about street murals. And so you will probably recognize many of the murals that they have that they put up over the last couple of years through mostly the downtown. When the Concrete Canvas is doing their festival, they're looking for high profile, ideally large walls that they can bring in local and international artists to come and add murals on. For 2023, we are asking them to and supporting them to focus on artwork and murals that go on city infrastructure. And we're looking to expand a little bit beyond just the downtown core as well. So this is, if you get an email from me asking about whether a wall or a piece of city infrastructure is available, it's likely about Concrete Canvas. And if you have part of your portfolio walls that are available for painting, let Peter and I know, because we keep a list going of potential spaces. We're also happy to be bringing back the summer concert series. Peter talked about how last year we had a 10-part series that was specifically in BIAs. We're happy to expand this year for the summer concert series into 14 areas. So 11 BIAs and 3 areas that don't have BIAs, but are commercial improvement program areas. This will happen through June, July, and August. Each concert features 2 local musicians or bands. So that means that we have 28 bands in total, 14 concerts, and we're going to be announcing that schedule in the next month or so, and happy to keep bringing not only music to those public spaces, working with the BIAs and other community partners, but also offering these paid opportunities for musicians, because a lot of these are more emerging artists, semi-professional, who maybe don't get opportunities that are also paid. So we're happy to provide that opportunity through the summer concert series. If you work at City Hall, you might remember the summer concert series. We used to do it in 2018 and 2019 under the Music Mondays title. So this is sort of an evolution of the Music Mondays program. Another a new project that we're funding through Mayor's Task Force on Economic Recovery is asphalt art. We've been doing lots of murals on walls. This year we're going to be testing out painting or adding artwork to the ground. We do this in coordination with Public Works to ensure that there's, that the public, that there's always meets all the requirements for safety. We're looking at this in a couple of ways. We're looking to follow our council-approved decorative crosswalk guidelines, which were approved in 2020 to bring artist-designed crosswalks to 2 different areas in the city this summer, as well as potentially doing some ground murals in areas that are, it's a bit of a balance. And this is part of our first step into testing this, is areas that are a roadway, but don't have cars. So we're looking at places like Pier 8. There's some spaces that are roadways now, but will be closed down to vehicle traffic. And the reason why we're sort of looking at the specific areas is a way for us to test how the paints will work on the surface, how they wear, how safe they are, what's the durability, without having the element of safety concern about vehicles being on that area as well. The images I have here are examples from other communities, one from Windsor, as well as one from Winnipeg, just to give you an idea of the scale we're thinking of. New for this year as well is a performance series. This one we haven't signed our contract on yet, so I won't talk too much about it, but we're looking to provide other opportunities, other paid opportunities for artists that are in performance arts that aren't music, to be able to present their work in public spaces, animate those commercial areas, and again, draw people in and hopefully add to the economic development of those spaces and to support the local small businesses. Our work at Pier 8 started, I believe, in 2021. And I think I saw Ken on the call. Ken, of course, was our sort of the predecessor to myself and Peter, who have just joined the team recently. And I should also shout out to the rest of our team. So we're a pretty small team, but we have Jen Anisaf, Meredith Plant, and Brianne Gasho, who are working on all these projects with us. So it's not just Peter and I. There's a team that are working together. The waterfront development, we are working with Andrea and Chris that are who work with everything down along the waterfront, and we're hoping to bring a couple of new initiatives, or sorry, one new initiative, one repeat initiative to Pier 8. One this summer, which will be happening in July and August, as we're looking to bring pop-ups at Pier 8 back. So this is a project we work with the community on to bring place-based creative activities to Pier 8 to draw people down to those public spaces to explore and again become familiar with those spaces. We're looking at starting this at the near the end of July and having a couple of weekends in August as well. Something else of note is we're working with the partners that are down at the waterfront as well to try to add activities that complement each other so that there's lots of different days to come down to Pier 8 to explore. So trying to balance what we're proposing with what the Hamilton Waterfront Trust is already doing and what the HMCS HIDA is doing at their 80th anniversary this year. So they'll be doing some new initiatives. The other image you see here at the top is Sonic Runway. This is, I'll put a big like asterisk with this one, to be confirmed by council. We are going to council to get confirmation of this, but we are interested in bringing a temporary light and sound installation to Pier 8 this fall. There are several companies where you can rent these types of large scale public art, and it's temporarily in your community. So we'll hope that can get approved. But this is again one of the projects we're testing. This is new for the city, so working with risk and legal to make sure that it meets all of our expectations, working with parks in the way that we're using the space, and trying to bring something new. But we'll see if it's permitted, and if not, we'll try another year. I mentioned also that our colleagues here in tourism and culture, creative industries and cultural development support the work we're doing specifically around the way that it aligns with the culture plan, the way that it supports creative businesses and artists. And one of the projects we started first was a Placemaking Grant Pilot Program. So it was made possible through a $100,000 donation from the Patrick J. McNally Charitable Foundation to the City of Hamilton so that we could administer and run a grant program for the community. So groups of residents, nonprofit organizations could apply to us for grants. Most of them were small, $2,000 and below. Some of them were a little bit larger, closer to $20,000, to do temporary projects in public space. The majority of those projects were proposed for parks, which is why I have Kara here, because working with Kara to figure out what is permitted in public space to be able to balance the needs of the city about safety and operations, as well as the community's interest in making change and testing out new ideas. So before I actually jump into that, I'll mention that Poets in Place is a project where we're also working with hopefully poets, sort of a poet laureate program. It's also pending council approval later this year. I'll talk about the 50th anniversary of hip hop after Kara and I talk more about the Placemaking Grant Pilot Program. So Kara, I'll bring you on, and I'll just talk a little bit, just to give some context. The Placemaking Grant Pilot Program, we did 2 intakes for this grant program, and we received 47 submissions, and we're able to fund 23 projects. Projects run from 1 to 3 years, and they happened all over the city, mostly, as I said, in park spaces, but in other public spaces as well. And it was about half arts-based programming and half environmental. But Kara, when we looked at these projects, the first thing that I kind of did when people were proposing projects were bringing the details for you so that we could talk about project feasibility. And there were a number of things that we talked about to get to yes. So maybe you can jump on and talk about this slide.
Sure. Sarah and I have been working together for quite a while, and I think she'll tell you that it's very rare that I will say no. It's typically maybe, and let's work through the details and see how we can get to yes. And there's a lot of things that from a parks perspective we need to look at just to make sure that it's going to be a successful project. And you know, my background is in art and in landscape architecture, so I already have this very keen interest in bringing art into our spaces. And I've seen that when we support the activation of these spaces and we make sure that these spaces are loved and cared for, and people are engaged with the space, that often they're safer. There's less graffiti, there's less vandalism, and people embrace the space, and they really want to make sure that it's their space, and they don't allow things. They'll make sure they have eyes on the park, and really it's just a better space for us, and it's not just a place where we cut grass. So we really do like to support these projects. Public safety is a really big one for us. Obviously, with maintenance of parks, we need to manage risk in all of our park spaces. So often the designs that come forward, they need to be very flexible. And Sarah's great. Often she's already managed a lot of those issues before she even gets to me, because she knows that I'm not going to be super excited about something someone's going to trip over or could fall over, or things like that. So she's often done that legwork with the artist before she even comes and talks to parks, which is really appreciated. And then, we need to look at making sure that there's enough funding in place for the project and unexpected project costs. I do have a bit of flexibility in my budget to be able to help out when I have staff time to potentially do installations and things like that. But if there's a major installation that after it's completed and they pull the project out and there's restoration that needs to happen or things like that, or maybe even just some touch-ups, we need to make sure that we have something to cover that, because we don't want people to be disappointed when their project gets pulled prematurely. So it really is something that we want to ensure, is that the project is successful. Being temporary in nature is something that I actually adore because it allows us a lot more flexibility. We can test out different ideas. We can test out products. Sarah talked a little bit about painting on asphalt. We've tried stickers. We've tried different things out there, and it gives you a period of time where you can test to see if that product's going to work. And if it does work, then we know that down the road we can allow it for longer term projects, which is great. The other thing is just engagement with the public and testing their engagement. We've had projects that I knew from day one would be successful because there was that very strong engagement, and then there's other projects where they had ideas, but they weren't a really cohesive unit when they were bringing it forward. If you had several project members, and so that can make and break a project for us, and it makes it so much easier for us in parks to work with artists that have a really clear vision. They're very good at the community engagement. They've already got a lot of buy-in from the community, and that saves us from having to do some of that work on the back end. Insurance obviously is very important. If anyone's doing anything on our properties, and making sure that because a lot of them aren't big corporations or anything that has a lot of money, making sure that we can find options for them to have a cheaper way to get insurance. But if they are doing any kind of work on our property, because we're so litigious and everybody will, we have people that fall in holes on purpose. So, we need to make sure that those people that are putting the artwork in place are covered as well, and that they've insured the city as well. Balancing all of these projects with existing workload and operational responsibilities is a big one. We don't have any additional staff to help out with these projects, so making sure that we know who's doing what, and the time of year is really important. You don't come and talk to us in the spring, because you're not going to get as much of a quick response because we're so busy and we've got a million calls and things that people suddenly want to do in our parks and complaints that we're dealing with. So if you start talking to us early on about projects you want to do, then I have a lot more resources and time to commit to meeting with the individuals and meeting with staff and just making sure that we can support you. And then the last thing is just around community use. It's so important that the community embraces these, or they at least know about them. And I think that's a lesson learned for both Sarah and I, is that, well, people are coming from the community, they don't necessarily always speak for the entire community about what they're doing. And so doing a bit more community engagement in the future is probably something that we'll look at, because we've had a few instances where we know we've had groups that have been very engaged with community outreach. They've talked to lots of people. They've made sure that they've spoken to different groups within the city, and they've ensured that everybody's on board and understands what they're doing. And then there's been a few other projects where they were very low-key projects that we didn't anticipate the community having any issues with, and they were resolved quickly, but we could have resolved them beforehand if we'd talked to a few more people. So
Great. And this list, I would say, is similar to what happens when we talk about road spaces as well, or any other city-owned assets. We use, we work with facilities as well if it's on a building in a park. So this list is, I think, goes across the board for asset owners when we're looking to do temporary projects, because the other part of getting to yes for us is in tourism and culture, we don't own, or we're not responsible for these public spaces. So we can come with the community buy-in, we can come in with the funding, but we really rely mostly on public works staff to work with us to permit the use of these other city-owned assets. And so definitely appreciate it. I do want to pick up on Kara's comment about community use, because this is Powell Park, and all the projects you're seeing right on the slide all happened within a 1-year period. So these public spaces we're using, some of our organizers, like to have long-term planning a year in advance. Other things happen in 3 weeks. These are active living spaces. They're not static, and it's the balance of many, multiple users and interests is something that we work closely again with the asset owners to make sure that we do our best to make sure that we know what's going on and that we are flexible. One of the things Kara and I tell the community groups, and again through other, same with the commercial areas, is that the community partners working with the city should have patience and persistence, because those seem to be the two elements that help us get to work through the city systems, to get our approvals, to make sure the due diligence is done, and make these projects happen. So the two images on the left-hand side, the mural as well as the games added to the sidewalk in Powell Park were funded by the Placemaking Grant Pilot Program for community organizers. The two murals on the right were also supported, I think developed by the community, supported by the councillor's office, as well as in partnership with Concrete Canvas to get the muralists involved. So these are all, again, temporary projects, but these three murals actually all face each other. So they all happened, I think, I think they all happened like the same month last summer. So a big change. And Kara, I would say that one of the things that allows Powell Park to be a great canvas in this way is that is a space that is going to have development later on. Is that an element that helps with these temporary projects?
yeah, it definitely helps. It can also be a challenge. This park was very old. It was falling into disrepair. It needs a complete redevelopment. We had tried to go in and do some quick fixes, but unfortunately they only last for so long. And the community was seeing a lot of graffiti in this park. They were seeing a lot of vandalism, and the kids really weren't using it the way that they wanted them to use it. And so all at once, a lot of people came forward. I think there was some frustration with the fact that it takes years to get all the money in place and the staffing and everything to be able to do a full redevelopment. Then there's the engagement process, and it just was going to take a really long time. And so the community decided to take it upon themselves to beautify their park and take back their park, which was really wonderful. Some of the challenges we may see in the future, though, would be around the fact that the things that they put in the park are so wonderful that now trying to redesign the park could be more challenging. For instance, potentially the way that the basketball court is designed, it runs into the walkway, and it isn't necessarily positioned right. But when we go to redesign it, it would be such a shame to lose the mural that everybody's fallen in love with. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge that we'll have to work through with the community. But I think it's a really great example of how the community was able to take this park back, and we've seen a lot less graffiti and vandalism since.
Absolutely, a lot of our projects and a lot of the reason why we had these projects approved in the first place, or even the the initial ones, is because it was addressing an issue in those spaces. So graffiti is one of the largest ones that our mural projects started. Sort of what was the starting point. Another project that was installed, this one funded through the Placemaking Grant Pilot Program, is the Children's Garden. And this is an example of something that started out as temporary, but is looking more and more like it will have a longer lifespan beyond the 3 years. So the Children's Garden is located in Gage Park. It is run by a group of community organizers who have just recently evolved into a formal nonprofit. And I'll just shout out Juby Lee from PED, who is one of the team, one of the founders of this project prior to joining the city, and continues to be a lead with the team. And this group, their proposal through the Placemaking Grant Pilot Program was part of the first round of granting, and it was proposed specifically to address, like I mentioned earlier, the way COVID changed the way that we could use more formal spaces in the park. And they looked at the in-between spaces. So this is sort of behind the baseball diamond near the Lawrence entrance, and they have built several above ground container gardens. They've made use of materials and planters that were being moved around anyway because of some of the construction closer to the children's garden. They've made close partnerships with parks and horticulture, as well as with the local schools. They proposed this knowing that they had they did outreach to students at the local school to talk about what they would like in a children's garden. So it wasn't just adults presenting it to children. There was a role for children to help make the place as well. And Kara, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you got to say yes to this project.
Sure. This was an easy yes for us, actually, because they were such an excited group that were really organized. They knew what they wanted to do. They had already spoken to so many people, and we just knew that they would have the ability to not just present this idea, but really see it through to the end and continue it on. Often groups will come forward and they've got an idea, but they don't see where it's going to go in the future, and they really did, and they really had the support of their community to get it to that stage and to continue it on. So we had a bit of a challenge with the location originally with the children's garden. I was excited about this because we in the future want to redo one of the playgrounds, which is over by the museum, but unfortunately at the time the Children's Museum was undergoing renovations and they were going to need a lot of that space, and so we were a little concerned that it wasn't the best place to place it right now, and so we talked about putting things into raised planters that we could potentially move down the road, and then just coming up with different ways of and having raised gardens was important too, just for accessibility. And so we talked through the actual layout with them, and that was something that they were very open to, and it made it much easier to work with them, and knowing that they were making sure that what they were doing was going to be safe and utilized, because it is in a very open space within Gage Park. There's a master plan within Gage Park. There's already a lot of programming, a lot of events, and so they needed to be able to shift and make sure that they weren't impacting anything that's already going on in the park, and they were very good at doing that. So they were, the community engagement was huge, all the way from just preparing their proposal, bringing it to us, and then getting people to help them. They've done a lot of events around the space, and they've got a lot of plans for the future of the space. And they share their plant list with us. They do a lot of stuff to ensure that it's going to be successful. The other thing is knowing that this wasn't necessarily something temporary that would continue on, we were able to fit it into the community garden process. So they've essentially leased that space for their and been able to get cheaper insurance through the city. And so that way they were able to probably do a little bit more in terms of their building and making things semi-permanent, which was really great for them. They also evolved into a registered not-for-profit because that way they could get more funding and in place, and that was something that was really important to them because they really do have some grand plans for how this is going to evolve and grow. And then they had a lot of regular programming to activate the garden. Their event to open the garden was absolutely wonderful. They engaged the schools, they engaged so many people in the community, and everyone was really excited and came up to them and said, "We're so happy for this place for our kids to learn about gardening, and they can touch things and pick things, and they're not being told, no, don't do that." And they're learning, and that was really important for a lot of people because through COVID, a lot of those spaces like our playgrounds and things like that were shut down, and even in the space that they've located themselves, there's a little creek and there's water and there's things that kids can play in, and it starts to bring them back to nature and give them that appreciation. So it's been a really great project.
Great. We have just a few more slides. Woodlands Park is another project funded through the Ghost Landscape in Woodland Park is another project funded through the Placemaking Grant Pilot Program. And you might notice that the examples we've given are all Ward 3. We did have 40% of our applications from Placemaking Grant to the Placemaking Grant Pilot Program for Ward 3. There is an active, multiple groups trying to make change in that ward. So that's we do have projects across the city, but that's why we've but these ones are specific to Ward 3. Woodland Park's Ghost Landscape was run by Dr. Sarah Ehmke, who is a local historian in partnership with the BIA, as well as artists, to recognize and talk about the 75th anniversary of the Stelco strike and how Woodlands Park was used as a gathering location for the union organizers as they were planning that strike. And the city's response to how people used that public space 75 years ago. The city's response was that they cleared all the trees. So at one point, Woodlands Park was filled with trees, and the organizers of this project wanted to acknowledge the history of the space. And again, as a space that's going through change with other development projects that are happening, Concrete Canvas is very active in the space as well. The installation, parts of it are still up, include historical photos, as well as a sound installation near one of the buildings to try to bring back a feeling of birds and water and the music that would have played at the pavilion that once stood in the middle of Woodlands Park that was removed as well. Kara?
Thanks. So again, this was one that took a little bit of time to work through all the details. There were some challenges with some of their proposals, and so we really tried to get them to focus on those elements that were going to be most successful, and we thought that the sound elements and that the banners were probably their the easiest things to get into place that would hold up really well in this environment. It was a challenging location because we do have a lot of encampments in this park. It's pretty heavily used as well. We were also working in the park at the time on doing some enhancement to the basketball court. So we were already doing some work there. There is a spray pad that's going into one of the spaces, and they had proposed a sculpture in that space that was we talked it through a few times. There was some challenges with safety around it and how we were going to maintain around the space. And then ultimately, we just determined that it was probably not going to be very successful, and that we should focus on the things that would be really successful and make sure that the project was well received by the community. So, there was a lot of vandalism in this park, but so far we haven't really seen anything to date with the banners, and that's fantastic. There was also just because it was such a long planning process, the team that originally brought it to us did sort of fall apart a little bit, and that was, you know, nobody's fault, but it was great that at least the person that had spearheaded this really did stick with it and got this to the finish line. So I think that's really fantastic. There were a lot of city departments that needed to be involved in this, because it wasn't just parks approval. There was also the facilities, because they wanted to use the washroom building, and we had to figure out how to wire in some speakers where they wouldn't get stolen, because we have had some heavy vandalism in those washrooms, and making sure that they were okay with putting banners on the walls that didn't belong to parks and things like that. And so, you know, just making sure that they were able to adapt to the changing park uses made this project workable. And then, you know, just the way that they presented history into public spaces, this was really more Sarah's discussions with them, but she was able to make sure that the way that they did present things were still respectful for the, other users of the park, and making sure that, well, there could be some historical newspaper type articles. We needed to make sure that that dated language wasn't being put on these banners and things like that. So in the end, it really worked out to be quite a beautiful project.
Great. And Sylvia, I know we're over time, but I just have 2 more slides, so we're going to just go through them. Another project, Woodlands Park has multiple users. One of the other users is Concrete Canvas Festival, that I've been working with staff for a number of years now to talk about, you know, we talked about graffiti management. As much as we're putting up murals to cover up spaces that are getting tagged and are a maintenance concern for the city, we also want to provide spaces for artists, you know, taggers, street mural artists, to be able to do spaces that to do their art in spaces that are still public but are permitted. So in Woodlands Park, there are 2 legal graffiti walls, and the street murals that we're supporting at the graffiti walls, the ones through Concrete Canvas that will be on city property, and that they also run, they also install on private property. They're festivals. So August 11th to 13th, they're planning on doing a festival in Woodlands Park, which celebrates the 50th anniversary of hip hop. So we've been able to support this not only for the street murals, but also for this celebration event. It's important for us as tourism and culture to support the 50th anniversary of hip hop, because, and present it in public, open public spaces, because almost every element of hip hop, so breakdancing, you know, rap DJing, street murals, all were illegal. And in many places, you can't, you know, you will get kicked out of a public space sometimes, depending on what type of your music you're listening to. And so the city supporting and allowing, permitting these types of art and culture to be presented in public space is important to us. So we're looking forward to supporting this anniversary year in those multiple ways. We're hoping, you know, things like the breakdancing that they include as part of the Concrete Canvas festivals, in addition to the music. Breakdancing is actually going to be part of the next Olympics. And so they are hoping to be a, you know, official breakdancing qualifier as part of Concrete Canvas, if they can get the permissions to do so. So these, it's another way that we can test new spaces is by bringing other types of art presentation into the public spaces. And the last one, excuse me, is other funding sources. So again, I mentioned sometimes they're community-led city projects that just come up and weren't planned on a longer term. But we also have the traffic signal cabinet wraps, which is a project that has been happening for multiple years. We're happy to be working with ECDEV as well as transportation operations to bring more wraps into the city. So transportation operations, they received council funding to wrap every single traffic cabinet with local artwork over the next 5 years. So we're looking at 500 or more cabinets. And so that's every place that there's a street light and an intersection will have a piece of art throughout the entire city. So we're excited to be bringing that to all the communities. That's it. Thank you for having us, and we'll turn it over to Sylvia for the questions.
Great. Thank you for the presentation. So just so everybody that's watching in the audience, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you to unmute yourself to ask your question. And I think we might have enough time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. I don't see any. In the meantime, I just want to say, I always see pieces of public art and I never really realized how much behind the scenes work goes into bringing a vision to life, how much creativity and collaboration behind the scenes happens at the city. It's incredible. You guys are doing such amazing work.
Well, thanks. One of the things we try to balance is that our artists are professionals. They have their artistic practice, they have a specific point of view, and they have often have specific things they want to or need to achieve to meet expectations of other grantors, or because we've commissioned them to do so. So it is a discussion about how to balance the community need, the artist need, as well as what the community or what the city would like.
It's amazing. So we do have a question here from Catherine Noble. Catherine, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, you can go ahead.
Sure, thanks so much, and thanks for the great presentation. I've been working, I'm a business development officer in the business center on the first floor, so working daily with small business owners across the city. I've been working in particular with the business owner over on Locke Street. He's looking to, I think it would fall into this category, animate a public space, which is an alleyway. Not to get into too many details because we're short on time, but I have spoken with business facilitation. They've moved him over to zoning. Wondering if who the best person on this call is to connect with and, potentially talk about next steps and what this business owner would like to do with that space.
Sure. I mean, I think Peter or myself are happy to talk to them. I think it depends, again, is it temporary or permanent use? Is it city owned? Is it private space? That they do overlap about what is becomes an event approval process if it's city owned space. So depending on what they're interested in.
Okay, his landlord does own the alleyway and the parking lot behind, which is attached to, and he has given him full consent to use the space. So yeah, I do have quite a few details that I can share to maybe get the conversation going. So I see your email. So it's of course Sarah Ehmke at Hamilton. I just don't see Peter's last name up there, so I'm not sure how to.
It's Fortune.
Oh,
as in
Fortune.
Wheel of, yeah.
Okay, so either or.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Because sometimes it can be just we do get a lot of inquiries, and sometimes it's really small elements of their proposal that changes what kind of approval it is. For example, if they're thinking about a mural, who owns the building? Are they painting directly onto the surface, or is it going to be something that is a structure, like a panel that's attached? Does it go into city-owned property? So there's little elements that we can talk to them about and help navigate it. So one thing I didn't mention is that we don't actually have an approved process for accepting, reviewing, and approving these types of projects because we're so new. So it's often that people don't know where to start. So I do want to recognize the Future Ready leadership team that is working on this project. So Tiffany, Jessica, Phil, and Joanne, who are helping and will be actually proposing on Friday a way for us to handle and accept these proposals, at least from internal inquiries to start with.
Great. Thank you for your question, Catherine. And you guys can follow up offline. I think we have enough time for one more question. I'm going to call on Judy Lamb to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Sarah and Peter. Thank you for the presentation. It's great. And Kara. So this is maybe a little bit of a tougher question because I know there's such a need across the city and you guys have been showing examples of projects throughout. I'm just wondering, so when the downtown Hamilton secondary plan was outlined and the vision is that downtown Hamilton remains a focus of attraction for, live, work, play, learn. And the one thing that the pandemic has affected probably the downtown Hamilton the most because of the hybrid work and remote work, that a lot of, the key about maybe revitalizing downtown again is, I think placemaking is going to be key. I'm just wondering from your point of view, whether you think there is a focus, or there's a special focus in thinking about how to rejuvenate downtown?
Yeah, thanks, Judy. I I don't think we have had I mean, I think we automatically have come to the downtown area because of what, what has been invested along James Street for the artists. And this is where a lot of our more permanent public art has been. We've definitely had temporary art here as well. I don't think we've had made a purposeful choice to go downtown, but we know that, places like Concrete Canvas or organizations like Concrete Canvas, they want to be in that area because it has the higher visibility for activities that way. But we're still testing, and I think that with the construction starting with LRT, it opens that story up as well about how do we work with this space that's in flux, and in flux, kind of like Pier 8 over a period, like a longer period of time, about what can we do now, what can we do next year, what can we do in 3 years, as well as a longer term plan. So I'm not sure if Peter, you want to add anything onto that.
Yep. So we also have some funding which is specifically for the downtown, which we use for that. For example, Sarah, if you could elaborate on those specific projects later. But also, we're trying to ensure that we're not only focusing on the downtown. For example, the asphalt art initiatives are all over the city. We're trying to spread those out. And then also the mayor's task force also provide a lot of the funding for COVID recovery funds, and a lot of that placemaking was targeted towards those things and how to rejuvenate the downtown. It, especially because of COVID, like you mentioned, it was hit quite hard. A lack of people coming through, so a lot of that was targeted because of that. But Sarah, if you could go into just some of those that downtown funding that we've been accessing for it.
I unfortunately I can't speak too much to that. Pardon me, because that was for the permanent public art.
Yeah.
But I know that we work with Judy for the mayor's task force, and we are right now sort of spreading the love around. So not a targeted for downtown.
Maybe I can help with that downtown public art reserve. So what we do when there's downtown projects with our developers, we ask them to voluntarily donate 10% of the DCs that they would have to pay towards our downtown public art reserve. So that's funded a lot of the downtown projects. And I guess, Peter, you and I might talk about that because the new DC bylaw coming next year might eliminate all that. And so maybe something to think about if there was no more contributions by developers, what impact that might have on you.
Yes, I think that's definitely worth a conversation. Actually, what I was referring to, I should clarify, is actually the there's funding for commercial areas, and that's where some of the asphalt art funding came from, and a lot of those commercial areas, some of them are in the downtown.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your question, Judy. And I think that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you, everybody, for being a great audience and asking your questions and spending your lunch hour with us. And a very big special thank you to Sarah, John, and Kara for joining us today and preparing this wonderful presentation. If anybody has any other questions, I'm sorry we didn't get to Dula or Mark. By all means, you can connect with myself and I'll connect you with the speakers, or you can reach out to them directly with your questions. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.